Welcome back to another episode of Unhinged History with your unhinged host, me, Taniberlo. Look, has there been a break in our normal sequence of release days? Yes, but I swear it's for a good reason. One, we upgraded cameras. Two, we have a microphone and it has a little poof on it, and it's the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. I want to eat it. Don't know why, but I do, okay? Because the overwhelming feedback that I have received, whilst all positive at this point in time, was that the sound and video quality was horrific, which is fair because, to be honest, I am not a sound engineer and I am not a filmmaker, which is becoming quite problematic, to be completely honest. Anyway, we're getting there, onwards and upwards. And we're back with another episode. What are we gonna call it again? I don't really know. You will know because you would have clicked on it. We'll get there. But basically what we're talking about today is the unhinged history that was the medical profession in the 1800s, and a few ad libs as well because they're notable. We're gonna be talking about the various poisons and terrible common practices of the 1800s day. Also, a lot of these were practiced throughout the Middle Ages, such as heroin in cough syrup, mercury, the spinning chair for mental health, using radium, lobotomies, using arsenic as medicine, trepanning, and something called the stink, which is probably worse than what you're probably thinking. If that sounds of interest to you, please stick around. Cue the music. I would like to thank today's sponsor, myself. Well, it's not just me now, we have a team, don't we? Caesar Archivum, a historical-based jewelry business that is deeply rooted in symbols, and I hear that the designer of the jewelry is pretty cool. So if you wanted to support the channel, you could go and pop on over there. Otherwise, hopefully by the time this is out, there'll be memberships. I didn't know YouTube did this, but I do now. So if you join the membership, you get access to the same things that you get access to on my Patreon, which is the Discord server. It's a fun time. Whole bunch of geeky, nerdy peoples connecting from all over the world. It's great. We have something called Thirsty Thursdays, which is Friday for me, but all the Americans get lit and we just talk. So again, another way to support. Anyway, you don't have to do any of those things. That is not a threat. You can just stick around. So thank you so much for that sponsorship. All right, let's get stuck into what you're here for. So let us shimmy back into the past, into the 1800s, okay? People always like, if you could go back to one place in history, where would you go? It wouldn't be the 1800s, so that's for sure, okay? Just for a lot of reasons, which are probably a lot of different podcast episodes in and of itself. But what we're going to be talking about today is sort of like the European / UK / the American medical profession throughout the 100 years of the 1800s. It was so unhinged that I need to give a disclaimer. It's going to be gross in some bits, so if you're a bit squeamish, please just skip this episode, you know? So, first of all, there was many diseases that, frankly, we had no idea about in the 1800s. Nay, we literally didn't understand what bacteria nor viruses were. Now, this is not just individual to the 1800s. So basically, because the bacteria and the viruses were not, there was no concept of them, a lot of the treatments that were used by absolute randoms made things worse. So even in the 1800s, there was no regulation in these areas of the world to become a doctor. You could literally be anyone and just be like, yes, thank you. I will be a medical professional now. Med school, who is she? Never heard of her. Basically, it allowed untrained individuals to practice medicine and sell fake cures. Anyway, I think we can probably all agree that if somebody is like, hey, with absolutely no qualifications, I'm just going to sign up to chop people's arms off. This led to a proliferation, if you will, of what is called quacks and charlatans who preyed on the sick to make money. Sound familiar? America? Love you guys, seriously. But maybe the American health system will make more sense after this podcast. You'll probably be like, oh, right. Anyway, so that was one issue, right? In the 1800s, lack of any form of control and order. And then there was also limited access to medical care, because again, just like today, unless you have money, no one really wants to hear from you, especially if you're sick. And there was limited technology, right? There was also a really large misconception about not just physical illnesses, but add a little layer on top of that, mental illness. We didn't get into that. That was not good. So basically, let's begin in maybe England. Let's just start there. We'll cover England and America just to set the scene. So in the 1800s, there's a dominance of these randoms. A lot of them would be barbers, by the way, like literal hair cutting. Because, well, you know how you see those old-fashioned barbers and they have the red and the blue, like that? Yeah, well, that was because it was a sign that they were also a surgeon. I guess they had knives and scissors and things, so why not? Cutting off some hair, why not a limb? But there was also a whole bunch of other people that were just yes, I am very well trained. They weren't. No clue about infection and infectious stuff at all. There, in England in the 1800s, there was a very dangerous treatment that was super popular called bloodletting and purging. We will cover that, but it is pretty much what it sounds like. They would just let the blood pour out of very sick people. And, well, the germs and the bacteria in the sick people would then quickly infect the non-sick people. And then there was also a prevalence of unsanitary conditions in hospitals and surgeries, i.e. a surgeon might be treating somebody with syphilis and then go and deliver a baby, and then without washing one's hands or apron, go and bloodlet someone's pustules. That's probably a mild day. Okay? So that's England at the time. Also, think damp, dreary, not much sanitation, etc., etc., etc. Whatever, okay? Let's go over the pond to America, 1800s. Not much better, really at all. They were very influenced by the European practices in America, right? Even though they would have been oh, absolutely, the queen, ew, or king, whatever it was, I don't know. Ask an English person. Same. Lack of regulation, lack of medical education, lack of practice. So people could become surgeons even if they've never even seen a dead body before. That was accepted. Again, dangerous, pretty much the exact same situation. Okay. Well, let's just call it what it was the same thing. Okay. So basically there was a few keywords that we're gonna be using. Miracle cures, all the rage. So snake oil, which isn't a thing. People would be sold to be like, yeah, this will like get rid of all your problems, whatever they may be. Also mercury, the element mercury, you know, the metal, the silver stuff, that stuff that's highly toxic was used as a cure for a bunch of different things. They would ingest it, which is fun for no one. It's a terrible time. Mercury poisoning. We're gonna do a whole episode on mercury, so I'm not gonna like get into it, but like there's a reason people use the term mad as a hatter, because you went mad. In America, but also England, there was a prevalence of medical experiments that would take place on vulnerable populations. The poor people, the slaves, because we're in slavery ages at this point, and prisoners. So these quacks, these weirdos that were like, oh, I'm gonna trepanning someone today. I'm gonna give somebody a lobotomy. They would practice on vulnerable minorities. So let that sink in. When people talk about systemic issues, like this is only like in the 1800s. It's really not that long ago. Right? This continued, by the way, all the way through to 1940 or something in World War II, right? In camps, people would be experimented on awake. Anyway, I did give a disclaimer this would get pretty dark. So these unhinged medical practices, which we'll get into detail in a sec, obviously there was a high mortality rate of patients. Like, they were like, we can heal people, and just everyone died, which then led to a perpetuation of harmful medical beliefs and practices, and also led to a complete mistrust of medical professionals by the general public. Because fair enough, in the 1800s, fair enough, you know. However, it's pretty interesting to observe our culture today, you know. These ideas get passed down, the pipeline makes sense, you know what I'm saying? Because like if you're having a baby and then like you walk out and you have like an infection, you're probably not going to trust that doctor or any. And then you're going to tell your kids, and then their kids, and then their kids, and it's like, okay, I feel like you're with me. I hope you are. But anyway, we have science today. We understand germs and bacteria a lot more. We're all learning. We're all people of science, you know, with hypotheses that we're constantly trying to prove untrue or true and move forward. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about was some leading favorite go-tos, favorite things that people would use in the 1800s as medicine. So let's start with heroin. You heard me right, like flat out heroin. It was used and marketed as a non-addictive drug. Well, not even drug. I don't even think they used the word drug back then. I think they just called it heroin. It was called heroin hydrochloride, preeminently adapted for the manufacture of cough elixirs, cough balms, cough drops, cough lozenges, and cough medicines. It cost $4.85 per ounce. Like the raw stuff, you know. Now, this came about from a pharmaceutical company called Bayer. They actually coined the name heroin. They came up with that. So now all the way through to 1898. So like we're almost into the 1900s here, right? See what I'm saying? They marketed it as a non-addictive cough medicine. And one of their big markets was children. So, you know, little Johnny, little Billy gets a cough. What does mum do? Well, she goes down to the pharmacy and buys a bottle of heroin. And we wonder why we've got problems. It was sold in over 23 countries. So you know, most places had it. And Bayer, the company, produced around 1 metric ton. Is that right? Yeah, 1 ton. That's 1,000 kilograms, which is like really quick math, like maybe like 2,200 pounds-ish of like flat out, non-watered down heroin in 1 year, which was, I think, what did I say? 1898, I think. That was 1 year's worth of goods. So naturally, people became addicted to it because it's literally like, it's highly addictive. And because of its addictive qualities, they were taking cough syrup with heroin in it. The babies then get born addicted to the substance, and then they're like, oh, let's ban it. And then they were like, why is everyone so unhinged? Why? Well, do the math, you know? Like, anyway, we're still in an opiate crisis, might I also add. They're really addictive, and we're still, repercussions of that still going down today. Why don't we move on, shall we? Next in line is mercury. Mercury is it's a metal that, you know, it's pretty fun to look at, and you want to touch it, but you don't touch mercury, right? Because it's highly poisonous to the human being. But back in the day, it was used as a very common elixir in topical medicine. Like, people were claiming that it was successful in fighting infection because it was because it was so toxic. They were like, oh, well, it'll get rid of the bugs that we don't understand or whatever. But then, you know, patients started dying from organ damage. So they were like, oh, and then eventually they were like, oh, it's the mercury. Also, if people like didn't have, you know, if they weren't like, you know, having a little bit of quicksilver in the morning, but they were exposed to it, because mercury was in a ton of stuff then, they would go insane. Insane. Like, what it does neurologically is insane. It's crazy. So yeah, that was a fun one for probably no one. I don't think anyone I feel like it would be the most unfun thing. It's really highly toxic. Please never touch mercury unless you're a scientist and you know what you're doing. Moving on, because we've got a lot to get through. A little, like, number 3 on the list. Again, alarming, because like I'm trying to like put it, it's probably like relatively not in order because it's me. The spinning chair. Wow, what fun it is to ride in the spinning chair. Well, not so much. In the late 1800's, doctors decided to put people in spinning chairs. And they weren't like, you know, an office chair like the one I'm in where you can like spin around. They were like, imagine the worst roller coaster ride you've ever been on, right? And like, it's probably like made of metal, wood, and it's like creepy and weird because it's like it's England or like early America, so of course it's creepy and weird. And like, you're experiencing psychological distress, okay? Of like what we would now term things like schizophrenia, psychosis, probably because, I don't know, you were given heroin over the counter or something like that, and you were having anything really. Mental health was treated like a weird, like physical issue, and the devil's in them, you know. So they would basically like use this spring and lever system to just like absolutely catapult the crap out of people, and to the point where they would then pass out. Oh my gosh. And the belief was that once they had been spun to the point of like no return, that they would then be cured of, you know, their mental illnesses, because the theory was that by spinning them, it would shuffle the brain around. Well, they probably did, to be honest, but not in that good way. Yeah, so that didn't stick for very long, but they definitely used it when they did, you know. Number 4, radium. Thank goodness our girl Marie Curie, you know. Marie Curie was the one that named radium. You know, it's a glowing substance. It is radioactive, highly toxic. Marie Curie, the scientist who coined radium and hang on, I need to Google this. I can't believe I can't remember this. This is really embarrassing for me. Polonium. Anyway, both were very radioactive. So like to this day, and by the way, she died in 1934. So it was some time after everyone was eating it that she obviously worked out, well, hello, it's radioactive, because she came up with the term. Anyway, she's a badass, though, must say. But again, we're talking about the 1800s more so. She came later. So what people would do is just like flat out just eat radium. Now, if you've never seen radium before, it is literally like glowing because it's radioactive, and it would definitely give you radioactivity poisoning. Oh no, that's not the wrong radioactive. Oh my gosh. Anyway, uranium have a half-life of like 4 billion years or something like that, which means that they're like still active and like can harm a living being for a very long time. I don't really know what else to say on that. It's since been banned. But like just quickly touching on Marie Curie, because like she, again, we love a woman of science. Her laboratory notes where she was like working out, you know, when she was founding 2 whole ass elements on the periodic table, all those notes are like in like a lead situation because they're still so highly radioactive that like you can't go near them without getting poisoning, like without getting sick, let alone eating it. They didn't just eat the radium, they had radium suppositories, which is something that is used not in the oral sense, but in the other end. If you're a male, typically it's up the, and if it, sometimes, yeah, you get the idea. So they took this like glowing radioactive thing and put it up where the sun don't shine. Fun fact. So, yeah, let's talk about lobotomy, shall we? This arguably was the most unhinged thing maybe in, like this whole episode is unhinged, but this is highly unhinged. A frontal lobotomy. This dude named Walter Freeman, the boy, developed what was called the ice pick lobotomy. To be honest, this is in 1945. So like this is sort of outside of our scope of timeline, but it had to be included because he performed 5,000 of these frontal lobe lobotomies, ice pick lobotomies. It's exactly what it sounds like, a pick to the brain. Later in history, again, I'm talking about 1945, that's like what, 70 years ago? Like end of World War II situation, is that right? Anyway, he was considered a moral monster because he was, and that the lobotomy was one of the most barbaric mistakes of modern medicine. Fair enough, because it's horrifying. So a lobotomy consists of cutting or scraping away most of the connections to and from the prefrontal cortex. The anterior part of the frontal lobes, like, and separating it from the anterior part, right? Now, fun fact about our like cerebral cortexes is like that's kind of like what makes us be humans. Helps us think little thoughts. So, you know, when someone just goes in there with a knife, well, literally, like, what's actually shocking is that there were a handful of people that actually got better. Compared to what? You know, like, but most patients either died or went absolutely insane because they had their brain sliced into pieces. Yeah, I just like don't even really know what to say on that other than like, let's hope that guy burns in hell. Is that rude? Nah, that's not rude. That's ridiculous. Moving on. Number 6, arsenic. You know, the rat poison. We've spoken about arsenic on the podcast before, haven't we? Yeah, we have. Yeah, that used to be a medicine. I think I did mention that in my Don't Lit the Green Walls episode. But it used to be a treatment for syphilis, which is a sexually transmitted disease, which if not treated, your nose will probably fall off. It's awful. And as a painkiller. Do you know how horrifying dying of arsenic poisoning is? It literally burns your esophagus and your it burns your digestive system from the inside out. Painkiller? That confuses me. I need if you're a doctor, could you please comment below, because confused. Don't understand the logic there. Do you know what's alarming? Is that obviously we realized arsenic was like really bad for you, i.e. would kill you. But like, quote unquote, according to my source, which I'll cite below, it has largely been phased out of medicine. I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know. We're gonna have to Google that all together now, you know. Anyway, 7, trepanning. This was from the medieval times. Insert horrifying, like Byzantine era imagery of some weird looking monk performing a trepanning. Anyway, basically it's a surgical procedure where a hole is drilled into the skull, right? Now, the whole like, I'm sorry, I did not mean to laugh because this is awful. But basically, they would bore a hole, a borehole or whatever. Like think about maybe a screwdriver sized hole, and until the outer membrane of the brain was exposed, and it was believed to alleviate pressure on the brain, which actually is sometimes the case in modern medicine. However, the issue is that, like, I don't think, like, well, no, back then they didn't think about it like that. They were letting the ghosts out, okay? That's what they were doing. Yes, they were letting the devils out. So someone was like, you know, had an epileptic fit. Oh, they got devils in their brain. Let's, you know, cure it by drilling a hole into their head. Totally makes sense. Funnily enough, when your brain is literally exposed to air, germs, bacteria would get inside of it. Also, it would be used if somebody had a skull fracture. Again, I don't really know how they would have even known if someone had a skull fracture, because this is like pre-X-rays, obviously. Not sure. Anyway, it was a common fix for, yeah, mental disorders, migraines, epilepsy. And like, I'm going off script a little here, but I'm thinking like, it lasted for so many hundreds of years. What was considered success, you know? Like, was death considered success? Because like, it feels like it probably was that, you know? Like, oh, the devil's left them and now they're dead. Like, we healed them? I assume that was the logic. Because like, why did they keep doing it for so long if people would literally die after that? That's got to be it, right? I don't know. Historians, let us know, please. I have questions. And then, look, let's be real. I could go on and on, but this would end up being like a terribly long. I might, if you want a part 2, we can do a part 2 because there's a ton more stuff that we could talk about. But I'm going to leave with number 8 being stink. That's what it was called. It was called stink. Did I mention bloodletting? I don't think I did. I think that's going to have to be in another episode, which is fine. We can do that. So yeah, in like the 1800s, doctors believed that diseases were caused by bad smells. They called them miasmas. So as a result, they would often tell their patients to expose themselves to strong smelling substances, such as on the like more palatable end, which is ironic, ammonia, which if you've ever smelled ammonia, don't. Don't. Even vinegar, that's mild. But on the weirder end, which it always gets weird, they would like literally be like, oh yeah, well, if someone like smells really bad, smell it, and then I guess you'll feel better. Hold on. So this kind of like goes back to like the Middle Ages, if you will, the Dark Ages, where the Black Death was, the plague. You know the plague. We all know the bubonic plague, right? Bad time, bad time. But yeah, they had this belief that it was caused by vapors or like the smell of things, because it would have been terrible smelling. Oh my gosh. And so like, you know, insert picture of the Black Death doctor mask where they had like the big beak thing. They would put like herbs and stuff inside of that beak thing to like ward off the plague from them. So I guess that kind of like snowballed over time, and doctors would be like, oh yeah, why don't you just keep a goat, like the animal, a goat, in your house, and when it has flatulence, put it in a jar. I shit you not. I'm like, I can't make this shit up. First of all, how does one even do that? Like, oh, the goat's farting. Go find the jar, Johnny. What the hell? Like, what would the process of that even look like? I don't know. And then, like, you know, every time there was like a deadly pestilence, you know, like the neighbor, like William III, is like dying of syphilis or something, and or maybe like, I don't know, a skin problem. Not sure. People would just like go in and like collect the smell in jars, so that when, you know, when it was flu season, they'd just take a sniff of this disgusting smelling crap. This one makes me feel nauseous, to be honest. Like, I guess the idea was maybe like they would get immune to what they maybe thought was the root cause of the bacterium and the virus. They sort of missed the mark there, right? I'm sure that's probably like, you know, like the concept of vaccines is, no, actually, no, I'm sorry, I don't get it. Oh my gosh. So that was the 1800s / we skipped a couple of times into like the middle of the 1900s, which was like about 70 years ago, which is the age of a lot of boomers. And I will just leave that comment right there with you. Let us sit on that for a moment, because like that generation definitely would have been given like maybe like a watered down version of a lot of these things. Not saying that it all happened, I'm just saying, you know, if your great-great-grandmother was sticking radium up her bum, surely that's got to do, like, surely, you know, if she lived and goes to have a kid, like, that's got to do something, right? And everyone's like, oh, everyone's depressed. Are you kidding me? Off the back of that, we have World War II. Anyway, I need to stop, because otherwise I'm going to go on a literal rant. I'm going to get on my soapbox, which a girl can talk. So in summary, in conclusion, let's conclude today with this. We sort of were able to look at the 1800s situation and the 1900s situation and the literal war crimes that happened in World War I and II. And we were like, ooh, maybe let's regulate this. Fantastic work, everyone. Now doctors obviously need to go to medical school. Fantastic. Science is used these days. Brilliant. And it really highlights and shows why the medical industry today is so heavily regulated, but also like do no harm. Let's move forward and find evidence-based medicine and regulate things that are bad for humans. But it also shows, potentially, why there is a cultural, how do I put this? In some subcultures, a distrust for literal PhDs that dedicate their entire lives to studying like one type of bacteria. And they're like, I don't believe it. You know what I mean? It's like, maybe we need to like suspend our cognitive dissonance, suspend our biases, learn from history, right? Like maybe when your grandma told your mum, who told you, who told whatever, that like doctors are evil, they don't know anything. Okay, maybe in the 1800s and maybe in the 1900s, but we've developed, we've grown. We now know what a germ is. We now know not to stick radium up our butts. And I will leave you with that. What an ending. As always, citations below. If you have anything to add, I would love if you could, because there was a lot of questions that have come up for me alone just after covering these 8 things. And yeah, like, subscribe, tell your friends, send it to a boomer. That's the homework. Send this to a boomer. They probably won't have an account on YouTube. They probably won't even comment. Even if they do, it's fine. Like, I don't mind. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. I'll see you next time. Bye.